before moving on to Verona and Florence. In 1936, Claus von Stauffenberg took the entrance exams to Berlin's prestigious War Academy. Here, students were trained in new military technology such as high-trajectory artillery, aviation, and the tactical use of Panzer, or tanks. Berthold von Stauffenberg had also moved to Berlin with his new wife Mika, while his cousin, Count Caesar von Hoffaker, lived in Berlin on the Kaiser Wilhelm Strasse.
My father was a direct cousin of Count Claus Stauffenberg. My grandmother and the mother of Claus Stauffenberg were sisters. So there was a very close relationship. And I think that had definitely something to do that my father ended up in the resistance.
At the academy, his high marks earned Claus a stipend to travel to Britain, and in the summer of 1936, he spent a week touring London, visiting Westminster Abbey and other famous landmarks. His military career now progressed rapidly. In 1937, he became a cavalry captain, and in 1938, he was assigned as a general staff officer to the 1st Light Division, later known as the 6th Panzer Division. That same year, the SA and SS launched the so-called Kristallnacht, when shops and homes of Jews were smashed and many synagogues were burned to the ground.
Da war ich 8 damals. In dem Zusammenhang haben sie ja auch jüdische Wohnungen gestürmt, haben die Sachen rausgeschmissen auf die Straße, haben sie verbrannt, haben geplündert.
Stauffenberg had supported restricting Jewish influence in the arts and public life, but he strongly condemned this action. Still, when he was approached by high-ranking officers, including his uncle, about a plot to overthrow Hitler, he declined. And yet, the gradual disillusionment with the Nazi regime had irrevocably begun. Stauffenberg was serving as quartermaster of the 1st Light Division when Hitler decided to invade Poland in September of 1939. Meeting stiff resistance at times, the division made rapid progress. And within 14 days, had captured virtually all of its objectives.
He said in response to one attempt to motivate him to help overthrow Hitler in November 1939, "I'm not ready yet." What does that mean? He was a captain at the time. He was a captain in the general staff. How many opportunities to oppose a dictator and a commander-in-chief are open to a captain?
Stauffenberg's entire ethos was that the army was there to uphold and defend Germany, and therefore he was a very loyal member of the army that went into Poland in 1939. Germany was now in a war. This was the regime that was leading Germany, and he, I think, believed to some extent this war had been in a way forced upon Germany, that it wasn't solely down to Hitler's crazy foreign policy.
The German High Command reports on September the 21st of 1939, 170,000 prisoners, 320 guns and 40 tanks captured.
Stauffenberg was praised for his expert management of ammunition and provisions, and later that November was promoted to the division's general staff. By that time, Hitler was already plotting the invasion of the Low Countries and France. On May 10th, Stauffenberg was with 6th Panzer as its tanks plunged into Luxembourg and Belgium, creating the spearhead of the 6 armored divisions that crossed the Meuse and raced across France. French resistance crumbled more quickly than division headquarters in the rear could keep track of. 1 week later, to his infinite disappointment, Stauffenberg was withdrawn from the front and promoted to the Army General Staff. Before taking up his new post, Stauffenberg found time to reconnect with his family. He was now the proud father of 3 children, Franz Ludwig, Heimeron, and Berthold, named after his elder brother. 1 year later, Nina would present him with their 4th, a girl named Valerie. From his perch at the Army General Staff, Stauffenberg witnessed the invasion of the Soviet Union. But it was not until later in 1941 that news of the systematic killing of Jews and Gypsies by SS troops reached the higher levels of the Wehrmacht.
Und dann bin ich verwundet worden vor Moskau und kam dann, weil ich noch nicht frontverwendungsfähig war, als Ordnanzoffizier zur Crew. Und dort kam eine der ersten Meldungen aus dem rückwärtigen Bereich, was der SS unterstand, eben diese Meldung am Schluss der ganzen Meldungen, er hätte 5 Zigeuner sonderbehandelt. Sie hatten da 5 Zigeuner sonderbehandelt. Was haben sie mit denen gemacht? Ja, die haben wir erschossen. Wieso erschossen? Nach einem Kriegsgericht die Urteil? Nein. Alle Zigeuner und Juden erschießen wir. Das war das erste Mal, dass ich das authentisch gehört hatte von einem hohen SS-Führer, der zuständig war. Das hat mich sehr umgetrieben.
You know, the early days of the Russian campaign, the Holocaust was ongoing at that point, and it tended to be a very, very brutal affair. This is not the later supposedly humane gassings at Auschwitz and everything else. This was very, very brutal. Pits dug and civilians lined up and shot into them. So it was dreadful what was going on. And reports of each of these atrocities would obviously go up through the military lines.
If one looks at the total number of Jews, for example, who are exterminated in the Holocaust, by far the largest number come from what was the former Soviet Union, in Belarus, in Ukraine, and places like that. And those are the areas that the Germans occupy in the summer and fall of 1941. And truly horrible things happened there, large-scale killings and the like.
Da hat es der Major von Gersdorf und noch einer, die im Hubschrauber über die Gegenstadt geflogen waren, gesehen, wie ein Riesengrab war und da Leute erschossen wurden. Es wurden dann 8000 Juden, hatte die lettische SS erschossen. Ich war damals 25 Jahre alt. Wen sollte ich fragen? Ach, da kam nur der Oberst von Tresco in Frage. Das war ein väterlicher Freund, 1A der Heeresgruppe, also Geschäftsführer des Stabes, wenn man so sagen will.
Major General Henning von Tresco, who was serving on the Eastern Front in the Heeresgruppe Mitte, had been plotting Hitler's overthrow since the early 1930s.
War wohl ein sehr brillanter Denker, sehr klar. War ein Womanizer, das ist gar keine Frage. Muss eine sehr starke Ausstrahlung gehabt haben. Insofern hat es mich immer sehr erstaunt, dass sich so jemand, bei dem eigentlich eine militärische Karriere auch gerade innerhalb eines solchen Systems sehr stark vorgegeben war, sich aktiv entscheidet, etwas zu tun, was, sagen wir mal, dieser Karriere vorsichtig gesagt zumindest nicht förderlich gewesen ist.
Und dann gab es damals so eine Sprache, die man sich angewöhnt hat, wo man rausfand, ob einer Nazi war oder nicht. Und ich wusste, er war kein Nazi. Ich bewunderte seine Intelligenz. Und dann ging man so um 11 Uhr abends so rüber. Da war Tresco häufig am Schachspiel zur Erholung, seiner Erholung. Und dann wurde besprochen, wie das Attentat durchgeführt wurde. Wie ich hinkam, 1942, war gar keine Frage mehr, das ein Attentat, sondern nur wie.
Von Tresco understood that the Wehrmacht on the Eastern Front had a unique opportunity to incubate a conspiracy, given its independence from the SD, the Gestapo, and the SS. In July of 1941, Von Tresckow received a visitor from the General Staff, Stauffenberg. The young officer agreed with Tresckow that Hitler was a danger, but he was not yet ready to join the conspiracy, as he explained to his brother Berthold.
We must win the war first. In war, one cannot do that sort of thing. But afterwards, when we go home, we will clean up that brown plague.
As late as the summer and fall of 1942, during one of his fact-finding tours in the Ukraine, Stauffenberg remained convinced that the Eastern Front could be held.
There's no question that the Soviet Union was on the point of collapse after the battles of Kiev and Bryansk. But when we were ready to exploit the success, the bad weather came back.
But in that same year, Stauffenberg received the first reports of the mass murder of Russian Jews by SS special forces known as Einsatztruppen.
And he got wind of these and was astonished and horrified that this was going on in Germany's name. And in effect, as I say, I think that is where his real conversion to the cause comes from.
Some of his religious background, as a Catholic, there's always a greater authority. Yeah, there's a greater authority than your Führer. Yeah, all this came together then and made a loyal member of the officer caste into a rebel.
He began a one-man campaign to convince commanders at the Eastern Front to try to confront Hitler and wrest control from him. So I would date his active resistance from April 1942.
Or motivated to make that switch from general, non-specific opposition to active opposition and even to the point of plotting to assassinate Hitler. To my mind, it's the Holocaust that is actually decisive. It's knowledge of what was going on in Germany's name.
In the months to come, von Tresckow would emerge as the dominant force in the opposition against the Führer.
Aber hat innerhalb der Heeresgruppe Mitte eigentlich versucht, ein Zentrum zu sammeln von Leuten, auf die sich verlassen konnte. Das war eigenartigerweise auch relativ bekannt.
He, in effect, turned his command into sort of a nest of resistance. He attracted officers or